welcome to Free Period. This week, we're actually going to talk about how I accidentally built so many apps that I made my students' lives harder and what we're doing in order to fix that. Welcome, Shayne. It's good to be back. And
Good
how
to
are
be
you?
back. Good. We're in full summer break, so I'm excited. I'm going back to the United States here soon, so haven't been back in a while, so I'm excited. It'll be fun.
Nice. One of the
Um,
inspirations for this week was, in fact, that I removed the television from my house.
yeah,
And I found that it was transformative. Like, as a parent of two young kids, you can get into some bad habits term time when everyone's stressed, it's exams and the grade, and they come home from school and they're just hungry and they want to zone out for a bit. And then, one episode of Hannah Montana turns into two, turns into three. It's just always there. It's like that whole idea about leaving your phone in another room when you go to bed so that you can actually sleep deeper and have
yeah,
a scientific evidence to support this. When the TV's there, they ask to watch it. Since I've
totally.
removed it, I've noticed that, we're slowly as a family getting into better habits, and it's been
For sure.
really transformative.
Yeah.
And, it
Well,
also just made me reflect on the idea of just building out way too much stuff for students because of Claude is like crack and it's addictive, and you've finally been unleashed. So how can we rein that in to actually remove friction and
yeah,
not end up with this like thing where we're creating a surface for every student to interact with, and the bigger the surface, the more they have to learn, and actually the more friction that they end up with, not less.
yeah, for sure. Well, and it's like not everything is an app problem, right? And I think it's like with your kids, right? With the removal of the TV, out of sight, out of mind. If you don't have it, it's not like if you want to stop eating, potato chips, you just don't put them in your house, and you probably won't eat them, right? So it's same thing as with screens or an addiction, or with these apps. Is sometimes there maybe isn't actually a need for an app. And we could use the tools like Claude Code or AI to actually build or help us to do things in the real world that actually can create a tangible, physical, real kind of change to the way that we interact with things. Because before it was kind of gate kept by certain types of people or in certain fields, and now you can kind of open those doors to building some actually really cool things. Uh, so yeah. So one of the things that I was reading about, I guess this was a week ago now. But one of the things here, I'll share my screen. But it was this um, post on X where he was just talking about this guy that he was helping. And he said he's obsessed with these DIY projects where people are using AI and Claude Code or Codex to build cool things. And what this guy, he was, and he's an agricultural farmer. He never studied agriculture. He didn't study farming or anything like that. He was a civil servant working for the government, it sounds like. And he wanted to start a farm, but he didn't really know how to start and how to get going. And so he kind of slowly worked his way into it. But he found that over time, there's a lot of little things that he needed to do. But he wanted to make his farm run better, more efficiently. And so what he did is he used these tools to help him build some things. And so what he did is he started with, a remote control greenhouse ventilator, so it could open the vents to monitor the temperature, and it was all wired up through a chat app, so he can kind of ask it to open and close these vents through a chat app. He was able to have it automated where the vents would open at certain temperatures. So if he needed certain things, he could have that automated, and the bot would actually just open them for him based on the certain temperature. He was able to use satellite crop health data laid over his own fields to improve the health and outcome of his crops. He was able to link all of the tasks and things that he needed to a database so that he could monitor what tools, sensors, and how everything is operating. He had to have a big electrical panel grid, and it's not showing on this, but on this post. But what he also had is like this grid of his electrical panel, and he took a picture of it and had the I think Codex build him a wire diagram that he could use to reference and show people if he needed to talk through certain things. So he didn't have to kind of draw it all out by hand. So it's just these really cool things where I think people are building interesting tools, right? They're using this in a unique and novel way to bridge the physical world and the digital world to kind of make something new. Because before, I mean, this would have been locked behind engineers or software people to be able to build all this. It would have cost so much money. And now he can be like, oh, cool. I can, I don't make that much money as a farmer, but I can build these tools myself to actually like maybe give me some time back. And so the cool thing is like in education, how do we do the same thing? Like how could you integrate something like this into the way our students are learning about things? Like could you have something where they build something physical, where they use Claude to kind of tinker with something and build something physical? Or can you use it as a teacher in a way that actually allows this to be more, dynamic in the way that we approach it? So I don't know. It's just really cool.
I mean, that guy's project makes me think of a colleague that I used to have who was setting up and really into Arduino and like robot gardeners. He was trying to create a robot gardener with his students that would control the humidity, the airflow. And I think one of the really hard friction points that he had was that he had to try and teach code, like a bit of code, but in such a rote way that he was basically scripting it for them. Whereas I think, like as someone that uses a lot of Claude Code, you become more like an architect. So you understand the overall concept, the overall process, but writing and of the code is actually like that. The need to be able to do that, I mean, it's debatable, but it's kind of almost been removed. I always have very interesting conversations with developers about that. But of course, I think when, this is like a megalodon that is kind of threatening an industry and it will shake up the way things work. So of course you're going to be defensive about how good is the quality of that code. But we can see, with the delay of Mythos, why was it delayed? Well, if people don't realize, it was because it was identifying mass vulnerabilities, security vulnerabilities in human written code. And there's no other way of dressing that up. The reason why there were vulnerabilities is the people that wrote those pieces of software that have been used for decades were humans and were more fallible. We sleep, we zone out, we have life stresses. Whereas, you can set Fable, the Mythos version, you can set it on a task for days.
Yeah.
And it is not like getting fatigued. There's no mental fatigue happening there. And like Zcash, they identified, which is a cryptocurrency, there was a vulnerability identified with that, which meant that an unlimited amount could be created, so completely rendering the value of that crypto worthless if like that had been exploited. But they patched it up and they fixed it and they've shown due diligence since. But it's really interesting because actually you can remove, my original point was remove that coding element. So that activity that my colleague would always do, that he would find that some students would struggle to access, he could probably facilitate that much better now because it could have that right in the code piece. And I was looking at creating weather stations, and I want to trial doing one this summer where what would involve, there'd be a very small amount of wiring up some hardware, maybe even 3D printing the shell for it. And it'd be fun to stick one on the outside of my window, but they're very inexpensive now. And the fun part would be having the students creating the UI, like a little app on their phone where they could measure different variables and just trying to like make that more accessible. So it's something that's not like foreign to them. It's just, like it's actually something that they can see the overall process, but it's also done in with enough speed that you keep that engagement of a teenager.
Yeah.
Where,
Well, yeah, totally. When I'm just thinking like on top of my head, I feel like your conversation is just inspiring a lot of interesting ideas for me right now. But just thinking like, how could you bridge some of these things where it's like you don't necessarily want them to always have a computer in front of them or their phone out to do like Kahoots or things like that. And so you could build these like, I don't know, like 3D print some little pucks with like a little button on it or something, and then you could like build a game that allows them to like, add their input or something, right? By pushing the button,
hmm,
or like, something like that, where you have a little control panel, you can like pick A, B, or C, and so they can do Kahoots without having to be on a phone. Or you could have, they could, if the button could be like, you know, put on the screen, like, I have a question, and it could like link to the person,
hmm. Yeah,
or something in that chair. And so it could just be fun because you could create so many different, unique, and novel ways to integrate things without having to have a device, if that makes sense. So, um, but yeah, I mean, just make it fun, make it creative. I don't even know if that would how hard that would be or if that would be doable, but like, I don't know, it could be cool. So,
yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the inspirations for today's post as well is that I appeared on another podcast recently by M.A. Skidmore and Jacob Roche, and we posed the question, um, like, what's an ed tech tool you always wanted but couldn't find, afford, or make work in your context? And the idea is called the international. Oh, I forgot the name of the podcast. A second. No, wait a minute. It's called the International Teacher Staff Room, and it's on Spotify. It's really interesting, and I like this approach with the letters. And I was expecting letters that would be like, "How can I build this? How should I get started?" I've had a few people DM me like, "Oh, I love your biology site. I want to build one for." Recently, someone said like AP psychology. Could you recommend where I just get started?
mhm,
Which made me realize we need to produce some content on that. But the letters that we got, no one asked, I've got this thing I want to build. It was more like defensive, like, how do we actually create deliberate time away from the screen? How do
yeah,
we, like, what time caps? Someone said many schools I'm familiar with have no real protocol regarding when, how much screens should be used. My own children's school, almost all tasks are done on a computer, iPad, or computer. Keeping paper-based notes and reading an actual book has become a foreign concept. And I thought, well, we're producing this podcast, and everyone probably thinks that all we think that everyone should be doing is making ed tech, and that my classroom is 100% ed tech focused and students are never off their laptops. But actually, the reality is, I'm one of those teachers that you don't see sitting down at their desk, that I'm actually using it to create moments where I can speak to my students more. I've given examples before where I've made something called Splicer, which is like an iteration of Kahoot. But the main thing that I like about it is I can generate quality questions quickly that I can then use in other scenarios, like in a bingo or a card sort or a crossword. And yeah, they're kind of like filler activities, but it takes me
mhm,
time to build those. When I've got a new curriculum, it will take me hours to build some of those things. And I want a filler activity. Why do I want a crossword on the desk when students walk in? Well, because maybe I had a rough night's sleep because my 6-year-old was up all night and the coffee's not quite hit yet. And I need to just have those kids settle down for a second so I
mhm,
can get some clarity of thought. Or they're a rambunctious class and I need them
yep.
to quieten down as they come in. Like, there's all different reasons for using such activities. And
Well,
what
and
I
I think,
think,
yeah,
yeah,
well, I think on that too, not to cut you off, but I just thinking like, something that we've been talking a lot about is just because, we don't have maybe all that much, rules or things on how much screen time or like how the devices should be used in classes and things like that. There's not a lot of rules on those things. But the other thing is true too, where we like there are a lot of teachers who teach from the desk still, right? And so the more that you can use these tools to actually help, create filler space, but also help you get up and move and interact and do things, and get away from the desk, that's super helpful too, because you can actually use these things to make it more engaging versus feeling like you're just sitting at your desk saying, here's the next slide, next slide, next slide. So
Yeah, and I mean, like you asked the question, why they sat at the desk? Are they having to frantically plan their next lesson? So could leveraging AI planning tools help remove some of that friction? Are they sat there because they're just like exhausted? And why are they exhausted? Were they planning last night?
right.
I mean, when I was a new teacher, I would be up planning till 11 every night. I would print my documents at home for their worksheets and stuff the next day. And there will be a movement towards less slide decks and things like that. And I recently wrote a little article about like, why do I have a slide deck? I mean, a slide deck for me is like an organic lesson plan. It helps me track where I am. But as I become more and more experienced, I feel like I will move more and more towards a classroom where is not as many worksheets, that there are, sometimes I joke with my students like death by worksheet today, because sometimes we just need to churn through some content. But the ultimate goal is to like co-construct diagrams together, to unpick conceptual problems with a lab. And from my perspective, like how can AI help remove some of that friction? And I suppose that's why we are also, you and I, creating Claude Skills, which is something we're going to start hosting on free period, where you're able to just like drag and drop in an old, like one I've made at the moment. I could quickly like give a demonstration and show you, but like one I made at the moment is where here is, let's go for a window. Right, so I've got these interactive lessons and also these step-through practicals on my website, and I make a plug for every lesson, every podcast in there, Biology by Branford. But the idea is, so for instance here, this one I just added yesterday, the skill, I just dropped in my old worksheet for the lab, and it's like an at-home experiment, something that I feel is safe for students to take a little kit home with them. You can still pull that PDF up here, and I've created a skill where I can then add this like scroll through HTML file, which I'm calling a web sheet, because it's a worksheet, but it's online, it works offline, it's interactive. And by creating a skill, I've now saved myself time, because the next time I want to create one of these, I just have to do like, I select the command in Claude, and it will then generate me one based upon the worksheet that I submit. And here you can see a little enzyme coming in and cutting and breaking a bond. And that skill, as you refine it, gets better and better, and it saves more and more time. Like I've churned out these, not super quick, but it's about a 10-minute job to create what I think is a really nice resource for students to be able to use to review.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think, as I got my website up, I'll show you that like when I first got into Claude Code, it's addictive, and I produced tons of apps and websites, and I've put them all here. In fact, I think there's a few that aren't here. And I made this one as the biology exam was approaching for IB Bio, called Obscuro. And the idea is that I looked at the IB biology syllabus, and I found what I thought would be considered obscure questions. Like it's fun, creating a name, Obscuro. It's fun creating the interface. You can actually like view it here. And I enjoy like the design elements, added in some cogs here. There's a famous Swiss artist that produces all of these like kinetic and based machines. So I used him for some inspiration. And what I realized though, I was like, oh man, this is like the 10th app I've given my IB students that are preparing for their exam. Although they enjoy them, it's something else that they have to learn how to use.
Yeah.
So I then added this button. It was like, boom, download all of the SL level questions on this. And then it just pulls it up, and it's like, so now I've differentiated. I've created an app for the kids that want that, but I've also given that opportunity for them to disconnect and not be on technology. Because as someone that has spent quite a lot of time in this vibe coding space, I'm actually thinking more and more, how can I help remove friction for teachers? But that friction can then be used in order to help create more meaningful interactions between the teacher and the student. And
Yeah.
make a classroom that is more focused around not being on computers. Because actually 80-90% of the time, my students do not have their devices out. And we have a no phone policy at school. And there's loads of evidence to back up the idea of writing is better than typing. I mean, it sounds obvious. Of course, it's obvious. But all
Yeah.
notes I ask for must be handwritten. And that's I'm backing that up with some science there. It's a deeper processing. There's more retention. So I'm not saying vibe code, ed tech, everything, but the big message I think that we mentioned before is like, what is that one or two things that you always wished you had? And for me, it was spaced repetition that was specific to my course, and I now have it. And I can see a notable impact in my student grades. Like some kids have gone from a 4 to a 7 or a 4 to a 6. And it's because they've improved the retention. And now that they are able to retain the basic facts, we can work on applying them in class. And that's just really powerful for me as a teacher.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, and I think you're touching on things that are really important, where we are able to create those worksheets or those downloads or the physical stuff for kids to print and have with them, as well as the digital form. And I think the more that we kind of get creative and get designing and creative with the way that some of this stuff could work, I think you could create some really cool tools, right? Really cool resources, whether it be card games or ways in which you can help to facilitate the learning, or 3D printed model stuff, right? Like these AI models can work directly with CAD, where you could say, hey, I want to design some molecules that I could have, for kids to work with, and you could print those yourself. So there's like ways in which you can use the tools to bring them into the physical world. And I think that's super, super cool. And I mean, just the fact with Obscuro being able to differentiate with your kids that way, super fun. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like my takeaway message here would be AI in the classroom doesn't mean more screens. Sometimes it means like better paper or better connections.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because if you can get rid of some of the friction, you can get rid of some of the time consuming things that just drag your attention away. You can create more space to individualize the learning. You can create more space to allow kids to ask more critical questions and to think with things, right? And I guess it's hard too, because I know that a lot of students here, especially after hours, they go and they ask ChatGPT to help build certain things or do certain things, and I'm sure there's a whole educational process that we need to kind of be thinking about and going through to help them learn how to use these tools effectively, or maybe have more dialed in versions of things where you don't just get the answer right away, where it actually helps to kind of facilitate that learning.
That's why this is so exciting, because there's so many unanswered questions. Like I got in like not trouble, but had to have a little bit of a conversation to explain myself with my DP coordinator, because I actually in like 2023, I think it was, I was like, my students are going to use Chat GPT to look at their internal assessments. So how about I try and get them to get meaningful feedback from it?
Yeah.
And I gave a presentation explaining how I created a series of prompts. I gave them some exemplar work, and I was like, this is how you prepare chat in order to be able to give you meaningful feedback on your work. But then, of course, like I did that 6 months before the IB came out and said that would count as a second set of feedback. So I just had to explain that. I was like, well, this was done in September and this is March. So yes, I encourage them to do it, but they're going to do it. And I think instead of being like reactionary, it's going to be interesting to see which curriculum boards will not be reactionary and which ones will actually like lead the charge. You
Yeah.
know, we've spoken before about different states in America having different approaches. But what I find very exciting at the moment is that this is just such a new area. And there was a term that you used before, which I think we could have a whole episode on, which was something like, what was it, educational architect?
Yeah, I said I think a educational systems architect is what
Yeah,
the term
I,
that I
I
thought.
love that expression, because I think that what's you're going to find some of the best schools will have is not just like an AI integration specialist, but someone that's in the trenches helping teachers remove pain points, remove friction. And like we said, not just making a new version of Kahoot like I did. I mean, we got to appreciate that everyone's going to be on a journey. And when you first get into this, you're going to make apps. And
Yeah,
then as you start to become more and more skilled, you're going to probably start to thinking about, well, wait a minute, this is overloading my students. How can I actually spend more time with them and make sure that the things that I'm building and giving them are just simplified and more meaningful, rather than here is a 50 apps for my class that's going to teach you everything you've ever known. You
right.
need to know what it's like. So yeah, I think it's very exciting, and I'd love to speak more about the educational systems architect and that, and how we see that role developing in schools.
Yeah, I think we could definitely do an episode on what that could look like and how we could actually, yeah, design schools to run a little bit more efficiently, and not that the way we do things, because I think every is wrong, but it's just that everybody has a different way of operating. And I think it's just finding the best way of operating for you, right? That allows you to feel like you're able to produce the highest level of output that you can for your students to be the most differentiated and provide the best learning, and letting kind of some of the technology kind of take some of the weight for you, in terms of some of the tedious, annoying things. So, with that said, if you are new here, please like and subscribe. It helps us out a lot. And if you're looking to build cool things, please check out freeperiod.ai. It's a free community where we're just trying to help educators who are building have access to cool tools and show off their work. So if you are a builder and you have some cool tools, sign up and show us what you're building. And with that said, I don't think I have anything else left to say, but thank you for joining us. That's the period. See you next time.
Ciao for now.